Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Finish More Music podcast. I am absolutely delighted to be joined by a man who is responsible for writing tracks that I've DJ'd with, that I've been out dancing in clubs to, and that I've just sat back in my studio here listening to the production quality and the sounds flying around and the depth in the mixes and just the overall quality. So he's had a huge impact on me as a music consumer, as a music producer, and he is without doubt one of the most revered electronic music artists in the scene today, Mr. John Graham, aka Quivver. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the FMM podcast.
Thank you very much, mate. That was quite an intro. Thank you.
All true. As I said to you before, I've been listening to your music for years. I had like loads of tracks on vinyl and all of that back when I was DJing. So it really is an honor and a privilege. Thank you. So I like to start every single episode by really doing almost a day in the life of, kind of looking over what would I see if I was looking over your shoulder, because I'm a firm believer that successful people are people with successful habits and successful rituals. So these could be like creative things that you do on a day-to-day, or it might be personal things, ways you keep your mind sharp, or physical fitness, or those kind of things. So on a typical day-to-day, not when you're sort of jet setting around the world and all of that stuff, but what would it be like, looking over your shoulder from the getting up to the go to bed? What's it look like?
Well, I do. I am a creature of habit, I guess. I do like habits. I like a routine, and I do have a pretty not strict, but I do have a routine that I kind of, most days I'll get up. When my daughter goes to school, I'll go to the gym, and it puts me in a positive mood for the day. So it kind of clears my head in the morning. I'll get back home ready to work then, and then I'll get some work done. I'll get the first couple of hours is probably the most productive part of the day, and then I'll have a break. I've got into the routine of having naps in the afternoon as well. I'll do like a 20-minute nap now around 3 o'clock usually, which kind of clears my head in the afternoon then, and I can go back in and refocus. I found like if I've been concentrating for too long, focusing on a track or an arrangement or whatever for too long, my head starts to, it just gets cloudy, and I just think I need a break. I need to clear my head. So I'll do either a 20-minute nap or maybe meditate. I've got into meditation lately as well. So things like that help big time. So it's kind of, that's my routine really. Exercise in the morning, work, break, bit of food, nap in the afternoon, and meditation at some point.
Yeah, I'm feeling you on all of that. Actually, I do the nap thing and the one of the things that I
the nap thing
for
the last few years. Not it was probably by accident as well, just because I naturally just started getting a bit groggy around sort of 2-3 in the afternoon.
Yeah, and one of the things that I found can be useful, sometimes I'm not sure if I need a nap or not, and you mentioned the meditation, and that for me is a surefire way of telling, because if I meditate for like 15 minutes, if I start to kind of nod off whilst I'm meditating, that nearly always is a tick in the box, right? You do need a power nap.
Tend to combine.
So you said that your sort of start time in the morning. What time are you kicking off in the studio?
I'll probably usually start work around 11. Actually switch things on about 11:30 maybe.
And then your end of day is?
I've started doing jiu-jitsu as well in the evenings now as well. So that's another kind of taking me out of my comfort zone and blowing the cobwebs out 3 times a week. But I'll sort of finish around 4 or 5, and then I might do another hour in the evening, sort of 9 till 10 or 8 till 10 or something occasionally. I don't work in the evenings as much as I used to. I used to work till 2 in the morning on a regular basis, but since marriage and family and that, it's changed my routine considerably.
Makes perfect sense. So obviously your album Revelate has just come out on Bedrock. It's amazing. Congratulations. I've been listening to it a fair few times over. I think it's a phenomenal piece of work. I'm curious about how it came about, because I was talking to you earlier about this. It is a journey. It feels like it's being curated in terms of the journey. However, you're touching on a variety of genres in there, from the more dancey kind of house and sort of techno inspired tracks, and we've got the break stuff, and like even the beginning track, which is one of those tunes that I talked about just sitting back to listen to on studio monitors, is a wicked experience. I really like
cool.
it. So
yes.
I guess my question is, on the one side there's so many sort of, you touch on different points, on the other you've got a journey there. Is it something that came about by you mindfully curating in advance, this is the shape of it and what it's going to look like, or did it come about more organically? What was the journey of the album, so to speak?
Yeah, I did want it to be like a journey. I wanted it to be an album that people could play from start to finish and enjoy as an album, not just a bunch of tracks thrown together. You know, it was sort of originally that there was a lot of tracks that I'd been working on, but I only decided to make an album after I spoke to John Digweed about a year ago now. I suppose it was halfway through the COVID thing, and you know, there was no point making an album of tracks that were not going to get played in clubs. You know, at least as far as I can see, that was kind of a pointless exercise. So, you know, we had a good chat, and he was like, well, yeah, just do what you want then. Just, you know, make some good tracks. It doesn't matter what genre they're in, what tempo they are. So if you want to make a load of ambient stuff, do that. So I kind of took that, you know, as agreeing with what I wanted to do, and basically just went away and decided, yeah, I'll do a couple of breaks tracks, I'll do some down tempo stuff, and try and, you know, as we said, you know, try and make it into a journey and an album of stuff that people can listen to from start to finish. So and the tracks that I was making before I'd made the decision actually ended up not really working with the album after that either. There was about 7 more tracks that were in the pot, basically, that a couple of them particularly, I wanted them to go on the album because they were good tracks, but they just didn't fit in the end. So hopefully they'll come out later on. But yeah, the album kind of, at the end, track 11 and track 12 had to go. They just didn't quite fit, you know.
Yeah, because as I say, it's got a very definite shape. So it's interesting to me now, if we sort of zoom in and get kind of a little bit more micro on it, which is your studio sessions and how you start a track. We can talk about sort of general writing of music, I guess, after this. But if we just focus on the album, because you knew that you wanted it to be a journey, when you were about to start a track, how were you bringing influences to it, and how were you, I guess, what did you have the end product in mind? Okay, this is going to be the first track on the album, or did you have, I know I want these kind of tracks, and you saw how it went? What was it like to actually walk in the studio and write something for the album?
So the only tracks that were like that were probably the first 2. I wanted to do a kind of ambient intro, so that one, you know, that kind of dictated straight away how it was going to sound. And then I wanted it to drift naturally into, you know, a slightly more up tempo, but not quite, you know, 124, 125 kind of club speed. So I wanted the first track to be ambient. I wanted the second track to be like a bridge, if you will, into the more club tempo stuff. So those 2 were the only 2 that I would say that when I walked in the studio, I knew exactly what I was doing. The rest of them were kind of, I wanted to do a couple of breaks tracks, and one ended up sounding more kind of like old school electro breaks, which wasn't particularly the intention when I started it. It's just the way it went. That was Shine. And then there's another track on there, what's it called now, Altered, which was just kind of a random, more down tempo techno kind of out on its own sort of left field thing. But yeah, I had ideas about what I wanted to do, but the only two that were very specific were the first two. The others sort of kind of came together naturally from a vague starting point.
And is that the case then when you write like just tracks, as in they're not designed for an album, but you're going to write an EP, or maybe you're not, maybe you will, because you go in the studio every day, if there isn't a specific project that's going on, do you go in and say, right, today I'm going to write this kind of music, or you just sit down and jam? How do you start a track?
Yeah, usually I'll start with drums and a bass line. Sometimes I'll go through, I've subscribed to Splice now. I have done for the last couple of years, and sometimes I'll just go through and try and find an interesting sample, and that will trigger a track that may or may not end up using the original sample, or it might not sound like it did originally. But or sometimes I'll record random stuff into my phone, like just bass line ideas or groove ideas, and take them into the studio and try and create around them. But usually I'll start with putting some drums together and a bass line, and then see what happens from there. I do tend to try and find these days a few samples if I can, just something that will trigger inspiration for the rest of the track. And then it kind of, it's like the old days. I used to, everything, it was probably 50-50 samples and synths. Nowadays it's a lot less, but the ones I pick, it's trying to find something that hopefully no one else is chosen, and then manipulate it and mess about with it and rearrange it a bit so that it's not obvious where it came from.
Do you finish all of the tracks you start, or do you end up with, I guess, a group of sketches or loops and pick things to move forward?
Before the Revelate album, there was a few tracks that I kind of started and put to one side, and I think I kind of did the album in a different way to usual, because I was making tracks, I was starting ideas and leaving them half finished, and then kind of I went back to each one separately. And usually I'll start a track and finish it and then move on. But with this particular project, for some reason, I'd kind of had sort of 15 tracks that weren't finished, and then kind of honed in on the last 10 towards the end of the album, and finished them, bit by bit, which was kind of a different approach to the way I usually do things, but it worked.
So you normally sort of manipulate?
Normally I'll sort of start a track, decide, this is worth finishing, and get on and finish it. There's obviously some tracks that do get put to one side, and other tracks that I'll spend fucking ages going round and round in circles with, and that old expression, you can't polish a turd, is one that I use quite a lot, and I have to keep reminding myself of. And I've got, there's also been tracks where I've got like, there's one track particularly I can remember. I think it was called Feel It. Anyway, I must have had about 25 versions of it, of like the final WAV bounce, and every time there was something wrong. It drove me nuts, and I mixed it down probably 20 times, right? And then the 20th time I loaded up the session from the first bounce, and it sounded better than it did on the 20th. So it just it shows how fucking stupid you can be when you get like that anal thing about, oh, it's not right, and try and make everything perfect and drive yourself nuts until you completely ruin it.
Yeah, so is this project titles final one,
Yeah,
final?
exactly, yeah.
Been
Yeah,
there, yeah, been there a lot.
especially with with bottom end. I think that was down to the bottom end, down to the bass line and the kick not gelling together well enough or something. It was just the bottom end just didn't sound right on any of the fucking versions. And then I went back to the original, and it was way better in the first place.
So when you've sort of drafted you've got the idea, and you say, right, this is one I'm going to move forward with and finish. What's your process of arrangement? Have you got a particular way that you map out and sort of create the arrangements? I mean, some people have tried and tested arrangements they use. Other people through compose from start to finish. Is there a particular way that you tend to put your arrangements together?
Not really. No, there's no sort of. There's usually a few little things that will run through. I guess every arrangement I do, there'll be a little drop at the start, a breakdown at some point. Whether it's a big breakdown, I try to steer away from big breakdowns these days. But there'll always be some sort of breakdown, and there's probably another little drop towards the end of the track. But apart from that, no, the arrangements kind of. Just it is what it I know roughly what I'm going to do. I did try a few times recently. I've tried just copying everything for 7 minutes and then just deleting stuff sort of quickly on the fly kind of thing. So I'm kind of, as I'll play the track and then think, oh, it needs to do that, it needs to do that, and kind of delete things as the track goes on, and then copy things back in. But at the start, just copy it all as one block. And that was kind of, I found that when I've done it to be a quicker way of working. And sometimes it's it's kind of, you get that spontaneous kind of vibe when you kind of, oh yeah, it needs to do that now, and kind of do it as quickly as you can, rather than just copying each section by section by section until you get to what you think is the end.
Totally. I think there's a really good question there that you've just stuck in my mind straight away, because this is a never-ending problem that we can face, which is, you sort of said, when you think it's the end, how do you know when something's finished? Is there, what's the right? That is definitely done now. Put it to bed.
I suppose that this is the whole point of your podcast, right? I think that's it. It's I mean, as we discussed, you can go round and round in circles chasing your tail and looking for that kind of perfect mix that never materializes. And then some days it sounds great from the start, and you hardly need to touch the mix. And usually, I mean, I do sometimes. I tend to over detail things, and there's too much going on, and I have to, I'll get to a point where I've put that much detail into something, or there's that many things going on, I've just overcooked it, and I have to go back and take a load of shit out because it sounds messy. So sometimes things happen easier, and sometimes you just know straight away it's done. And then with other track, I mean, it really does vary from track to track. There's a track on the album called Atomized, which I spent ages kind of fiddling with minute details and decided, oh no, that sounds a bit cluttered there, and that little bit needs to come out. And I messed about with the mix and the arrangement with that for days. And but then there's tracks on the album that came together in a couple of days and sounded great. So it's weird, man. Just some tracks happen a lot easier than others, I guess.
Yeah,
I have got a bad habit of being like a perfectionist, and just spending far too long fiddling with minute details.
So I'm imagining, because the album's very much your baby, and it kind of answered to no one, because John said to you, look, hey, do what you want with it, and aligned with you. Other times, do you have sort of people you can bounce the tracks off, and they'll say to you, John, it's done, stop playing around with it, we love it, we'll take it? Does that happen at all?
Usually I've already decided that it's finished by the time I'm kind of sending it to anyone. So my manager, Mark will sometimes say, why don't you try this or that? He'll chip in occasionally. So but I think he's probably the only person who really kind of will sort of have a bit of an input at the end as to, oh, you could probably try that, and sometimes I'll listen and sometimes I won't, but usually by the time we've sent it to a label, I'm 100% happy with it. So
Right. Cool. And how does this dynamic change for you when, for example, you have someone come to the studio working with you? So we had Dave Seaman on a couple of episodes back, and he was saying that he, very similar actually to what you were mentioning with the idea. He said that he'll come to you and he'll have various sort of things that he might have recorded into phones or bits he's grabbed off of records as the starting point.
Yeah.
What's the dynamic like when you're working with someone like Dave and there's that creative input as well? How do you guys work together?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the tracks are kind of, Dave's had an idea, what let's try something like this. So I'll sort of get some rough ideas down, and then he'll turn up with loads of samples and ideas of where it could go from there. And then, he'll sit and sift through all his sounds and stuff that he's brought with him for whatever particular track we're working on, and then we'll chuck them in and see what happens, really see if they work. And a lot of the times they do. It's been a pretty good creative process, really. He's coming down later this week, in fact, so we're gonna try and get a couple of things finished. But yeah, it definitely helps having somebody else chipping in their ideas and kind of coming up with directions that we can start from as well. Because a lot of times that's the thing you need most when you're going into the studio, is like, where do I start? What am I aiming for before I switch everything on or whatever? But Dave sent a lot of ideas over and said, do you think this will work on the album? Do you think we should try something like this? And then I'll, like I say, go away and try and come up with something, and he'll come and add to it. So that's the way it's worked so far.
I'm just sort of crossing my mind here because, I'm a fan of Dave's tracks as well. And so people tend to have, sometimes you feel like, yeah, that feels like, for example, a Dave Seaman track. Is that just his influence on the creative process, or are you mindful, if you're engineering, producing with Dave, that he has a particular sound as well?
I think because we're making it in Pro Tools in my system, it's always gonna have my sound, because we're making it with all my gear and all the synths that I use and whatnot. So I think it's more of Dave coming down and putting his ideas on top of my ideas will kind of twist my sound a little bit towards his, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, so far it's been a good combination. It's if you listen to the tracks, I guess you can hear my sound in there, but you can tell there's something different going on as well, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you've just sort of mentioned the tools that you use. You're on Pro Tools, which I think is quite a rarity amongst dance music producers. What got you onto it? What's kept you on it? And also, I know you've got various plugins and things that you use. Can you give us an insight into some of the go-tos and the weapons that you've got in your arsenal?
Well, I changed to Pro Tools years ago just because people were doing it. People like BT and Sasha back in the day were kind of talking about Pro Tools and how great it was, and so I was like, all right, let me see. And I switched from Cubase and spent about 6 months tearing my hair out, and finally got to grips with it and got into it. And at first it was really, really slow, and it, I'd gone from being able to produce a track in a day in Cubase to taking a week in Pro Tools, just because the MIDI was so fiddly and it was just a pain in the arse. But I got used to it, and then I was kind of reluctant to change after that, because it was such a ball ache, like, to learn it in the first place. I couldn't face learning to use Logic or Ableton or anything, so I've kind of stuck with it. But Yeah, apart from Pro Tools, I do tend to go to Anna 2 as a go-to synth these days. I've got all the Slate stuff, and I've kind of got into that and learned how to program that. It was a pretty easy thing to learn, so that gets used a lot. Omnisphere, I've always liked the sound of that thing, even though it's not particularly easy to program. It's a bit of a pain in the ass to use, but that gets used a lot. Strobe I use a lot for bass sounds. What else? Dune 2. Started using that a fair bit a couple of years ago, but yeah, that's they're pretty much my go-to things. I've got loads of I use battery for all my drums. I've got loads of battery libraries, libraries of kicks, libraries of claps that kind of get updated every few months, and just I'll add a few new claps and take a few old ones out and whatnot, and the same with kicks and hats and percussion or whatever. And then I'll sift through Splice and try and find the odd loop and whatnot, and something inspiring to throw in there. That's about it, really.
With the battery kits, is it like that's a kit just of kicks, that's a kit just of claps, or they are right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And how often do you bring new pieces of software or kit or anything into your process? Because some people are sort of like a kid in a sweet shop with it all.
Yeah, it's really tempting, because you get like offers from whoever, it's like, oh, today only $50 for this compressor, and with all this extra character and old school sort of vintage tube emulation or whatever, and you're like, oh yeah, that sounds amazing, but I've already got fucking 20 of them, but it still sounds great, like it's going to sound better. So yeah, it's tempting to get to just buy endless amounts of EQs and compressors and whatnot, but I did kind of gather a lot more plugins and bits and bobs during COVID, just because I spent so much time in the studio. But I think I've got pretty much enough now to be going on with regarding sort of tape machines and compressors and EQs and whatnot. So I'm trying to limit buying any more now. I think it gets like you say, it gets to the point where it's just, it makes your life more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's another thing to learn. It's another option to choose in a world that, and I always think this, in the world of creativity, this is got to be one of the most challenging things to do, because even in the world of music, if someone's sitting down and of course skilled to play a guitar, piano and all of these things, but if your tools are my voice and my guitar, then they're your tools. Whereas in our world, there's like this never-ending sea
how simple it could be if I just played acoustic guitar.
sound sources and plugins and hardware, and then all the mixing gear and all of these different things. So, bringing something new in is another learning curve, and that is one of the things that I'm interested in as well. I mentioned, you're phenomenal producer in terms of the quality, not just of the compositions, but also the sonic quality of the tracks. How did you go about learning all of these things? And perhaps I think an additional question to that is, do you deliberately spend time learning new skills now, or obviously you've got an abundance of skills already? Is what you've got enough for you, and you're kind of happy, and you make music with what you've got?
I still watch tutorials occasionally on various bits of kit, but I learn from scratch, from trial and error from back in the MIDI days. I bought a sampler with an onboard sequencer. The first track I made straight at the back of that sampler. Now, I wouldn't want to tell you what that was. Obviously, it'll sound like shit now. But then then I bought a computer and started using software for the sequencer, and then a couple of synths and blah blah. So it was a gradual learning curve, and a lot of trial and error, a lot of error. But I've never had any sort of formal training, so it was, you know, back in the day it was more difficult then, obviously, because I didn't know what a compressor did. I bought one and I didn't know how to use it, and absolutely no idea until I went to somebody else's studio, you know, a big studio where we were working on tilt tracks, and obviously the engineer there knew what he was doing. So you pick things up from other people, or I'd work on a track with somebody. I worked on it was an old drum and bass thing that I was working on, and the guy that I was collaborating with, he had the same sampler as me, and he knew a lot of the kind of the ins and outs of it and the details of how the filters worked and stuff. So just picking up things from other people. And when I got Pro Tools, I actually paid a friend of mine, Gaetan Shura, a very clever French engineer guy, to come and help me with Pro Tools for a week. So I did a sort of a week intensive course, and made pages and pages of notes on Pro Tools, which is massively helpful. And I don't know what I would have done otherwise, because at that point there was no YouTube tutorial. So yeah, it was all a lot of learning, man. It was from day one. I didn't really have any idea what I was doing with studio gear, and it just picked it up along the way, man.
I think you've hit on one of the really interesting things, like no YouTube then, because same as you, when I started there wasn't a YouTube or anything, and I inherited what was about £6,000 I think at the time from my granddad, bless him, and went to what was Digital Village back in the day and said, look, I got this money and need to start out. And as you can imagine, they spent it for me like that. I think it was $6,500, and there was like Yamaha A5000 sampler and Supernova and a virus and a computer and like you, and a compressor. Like, I didn't even know what that thing was, and it was the same. I just sat there once I got it, managed to plug it all in, just go, what the hell am I going to do with all this now? And it was the same kind of, and it was on Cubase as well, similar to you to start with. So I feel you, and I guess there's a double-edged sword, because now there is YouTube. However, going back to whilst there are a million plugins, there are a million tutorials, and you could get kind of lost in there as much as you can with the gear. So obviously you've been doing this for a long time, and you have to maintain your motivation and influences to keep things fresh. How do you maintain the motivation in the studio to keep showing up and to be being lit up by turning up and writing tracks? And what are your current influences and the things that are inspiring you in the studio?
So I usually get inspired to go in the studio when I've just done a DJ mix, especially. I'll tend to do a mix about once a month. So I'll spend a day going through promos and a day on Beatport or whatever, looking for new tunes, and I'll always get inspired after that, after doing a mix, to get in and make something. So it never gets boring. I really love doing it, so it's always, I'm always keen to get in and create something new, and it still gives me a buzz, that feeling of creating something and finishing it. And not every single track gives me goosebumps, but occasionally I'll still get goosebumps there'll be a certain point in the track where things just click together and you're like, yes, that's fucking wicked. And it's usually like when the groove just sits right, or the bass line and the groove just gelling together really well, and I know it's going to sound really fucking fat when it ends up in a club. So them moments are just priceless, and it's just, I'll never get bored of that sort of thing. So, and obviously
because you're a DJ, you're going to be out getting to actually play the record and get the influence back as well.
You always get that instant feedback, which is great, especially if it goes down as well as you think it's going.
Wicked. So obviously the other thing is, because you write across multiple genres, there's that keeps things fresh, but also you've written music for TV, for games, for films. Can you talk a little bit how you sort of branched out into those different areas?
Most of that happened when I was in LA. I moved to LA, it would be about 19 years ago now. No, 15 years ago. I'm talking about. When I moved over there, there was a friend of mine who was friends with some people who were making video games, and randomly we went to Vegas for this video games conference that they were attending, and we just got talking, and they happened to be looking for somebody to make music for their trailers. They were making video game trailers, SPOV TV they're called, but it was that was just a chance meeting, and just happened to be that they were looking for somebody, and one of the guys that worked there knew my music. He knew the Quivver stuff, so it was like, yeah, see what you can do. So they sent me the first one. I think it was one of the World at War things or something, but I did that, and I mean the process for that was very different. There was a lot of sound design, and I'm not particularly a sound designer per se, but it was that, it got me into a different sort of creative process, and I quite liked it. And I did one, and they liked it, so they sent me another one. I ended up doing about 5 of them, but yeah, it was good, and it was just, that was really through a chance meeting. But the film stuff came about because I was working with Hybrid back in the day. We wrote a couple of tracks together, and we did some. I wrote a couple of songs on their tracks, and co-produced a couple of things with them. And we did some live shows, and they were working with a guy called Harry Gregson Williams, who's a really amazing film composer. So he ended up doing he did some live keyboards with Hybrid when we were doing a Coachella performance. So I kind of got to know Harry, and like I say, he's a great bloke, and he was, he lived not far from me in LA, and he's like, oh, come see the studio. So went down, and we got on really well, and then he ended up calling me one day and saying, do you want to try and do something on Pelham 123, the remake of Pelham 123 that he was doing at the time? So yeah, he sent me a load of stuff, and I had a crack at it, and he used a bit of it. So it was cool. I mean, it's something, obviously it was great to be involved in that world. It was a really exciting thing to be a part of. And then I did some more on a film called 12 a couple of years, well, a year after that probably, and then I did a little bit on Shrek 3 as well. A tiny bit of Shrek 3, but it was, yeah. And I did another thing a few years later after that, with another composer called Marcelo Vargas on American, what was it called again, that film? What was it? I can't remember. Oh, that's gonna fuck my whole question up, man.
Well, this is the beauty of things, right? You've done quite a lot of these different things now. You're even forgetting them, John, which is great. What I'm curious about here with this stuff is that I did a podcast episode a while back, a solo show, where I was just sort of riffing on a particular topic, which was the idea of, in the music industry, or in arts in general, we hear about this thing of people getting lucky breaks. And my premise behind that is that when these chance opportunities, like being at this sort of games exhibition, these things come along, you've got to be in the position to take them. Because had you have turned up there and not have put in all the hard work and not have dedicated, if that opportunity dropped on your lap, you would never have been able to take it anyway.
True.
You kind of made your own luck in that respect. Are there any more things that you'd say, look, that's been a lucky break that's happened in your life? Or is it a lot of this by design? You're like, okay, in the next 6 months, in the next year, this is my strategy, my plan?
No, I always thought I never had any luck whatsoever, to be honest. I don't think, I can't think of any moments where it seemed like, things happened, like any kind of moments where I was like, oh yeah, I was in the right place at the right time, or whatever. It's just, I don't think there've ever been any of them moments, to be honest, except for that one with the video game trailers.
So everything else is
American Ultra, the film was called. There you go.
right. There we go. We got it. So it's literally been the culmination of your sort of continued hard work, and you're collaborating with lots of sort of different people. I mean, Hybrid as well. One of my sort of favorite albums was, I can't remember what it was called. One of their albums, absolutely amazing. But you're collaborating with a bunch of people. You're turning up. You've got your habits. You put the work in, and then the opportunities are
yeah, I think, and the collaborations only happened because we became friends because we knew each other's music, and I was a fan of Hybrid, and they liked my stuff as well. So, and the same with the Sasha collaboration. That happened because we'd become friends because he played my music a lot back in the day and stuff, and yeah, these things, I guess, happened eventually. If that had happened 25 years ago, then it would have been a lucky break, I guess.
Right, yeah.
Working with Sasha, if it had happened in 1996, then it would have been a major lucky break.
So with that in mind, obviously we've talked about, you've done the working on all of the different sort of mediums, you DJ and tour, you have collaborations with people coming in the studio, you've got an album, you do obviously EPs, you run your label. How do you juggle all of this? How do you manage to keep on top of all of these things?
Well, most of them have happened over the years, so it's not as, I'm not as busy as that probably sounds, but I do like doing different stuff. So I'm working on some new scanner material at the moment, some new drum and bass stuff. So I mean, a lot of it is just, I'd get bored doing the same thing all the time. So it's nice for me to break things up a little bit. But yeah, most of these things have happened bit by bit, and it's all kind of spread out over a long time. So it's not as hectic as it probably seems.
It sounds hectic, particularly when I said that. I'm like, yeah, because there's this John and that John.
Well, when you think I started in 1994 or something, so there's been plenty of time to fit all that in.
Yeah, totally makes perfect sense. So the album obviously is out now, and you're going to be promoting it and getting out DJing. What is the plan, the sort of promotion of the album? Because I know a lot of people would be interested in that, because I had a ton of great guests on the show, but it's rare that somebody has literally just finished an album, and obviously you've finished albums before. For people who are like, how does this get out into the world to lots of different people? What stuff do you do, and gigs and all of those things? What's the machine that powers getting this out into the world? Obviously, being here, one of those things.
Yeah,
we're shouting about
it. Yeah, this is one part. Yeah, it's just trying to spread the word, I suppose. Social media plays a big part. As much as I find it very very difficult. Social media, I've never been that comfortable with it, but it's a great tool. But a lot of it will be through pushing things on social media, doing interviews like this, and hopefully getting decent reviews in good places, so we can generate some interest, but and then hopefully go on tour. We're looking at tours in India, Mexico, and USA, so Argentina now as well.
Awesome.
So yeah, just go out and promote the shit out of it, really. It's the first few days are looking pretty good. It's doing all right at the moment on Beatport. They've been kind enough to give us some space on their pages, so they've helped us a little bit. So that's good. It's all been so far so good. We got a couple of really good reviews. So yeah, it's just trying to push it out there, man. You're competing with so many people though now. It's difficult to make your stuff stand out above everybody else's.
I think the one thing that I feel confident in saying is that when people do hear it and when people do promote it and someone does go and listen to it, they're going to pick it up because it is a great album. And that, you know,
Oh, thank you.
there's the fact that there is that the quality is there. You know, you can push things that aren't gonna, that maybe I don't perhaps like using the word don't deserve, but I can't think of a better way of putting it, but maybe don't deserve to cut through the noise, but your album does. So I think once people are latching onto it, it is just going to get bigger and bigger. I feel really confident
crossed,
in it.
man.
I listen to a lot of electronic music. I'm, you know, a big fan of it. So I know when I hear something, I'm like, yeah, I'm really digging this. This is going to get played and played and played. So I do have a question that's I love to round out every episode with, which is if you had a time machine and you were going back in time to the John that was just starting out, and it's that sort of one piece of advice that you would give yourself, just in terms of creative process or being in the studio, what would you say to yourself?
I know the exact answer to that, and I'm not going to say it on your show. What I would say is, a better way of phrasing what I would actually say is, stay focused and don't take your foot off the gas. When things start going well, stay focused and stay motivated, and you know, stay inspired and love what you're doing.
Right, it's easy to get to take your eye off the ball when things.
It is so easy, and you know, I do feel like I did that for a while, but you know, it's definitely something. I mean, I've always loved what I do, but I think I could have tried a bit harder at certain times, and I got a bit complacent, I think, and I think you know, maybe that's an easy thing to do, but yeah, I'd definitely say, you know, stay focused and stay motivated and keep pushing.
Solid. That's a really solid piece of advice. So obviously you're talking about touring the album. Obviously people can go out now and get the album on Bedrock, Revelate, pick it up. It's awesome, and that is my, you know, absolute honest assessment of it. You'll be touring, and people can obviously keep an eye out for DJ gigs. What else is coming up? Music that might be coming out that people can keep their eyes on as well.
I'm still working on some new stuff, and the tracks, some of the tracks that didn't make it onto the album, I'm going back and finishing them, and I'm still working on a new scanner thing which will hopefully be out fairly soon, and the Seduce and Destroy project that I'm doing with Dave. We're hoping, you know, like I say, we're going to be working on that again this week, so maybe that'll be finished in the next few months as well. It's time we started getting things finished. So
a variety of music, some different genres, some DJ gigs to look out for as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you. It's been a hell of a ride. We've gone on to touch on a whole bunch of different things during the podcast, which has been great. And you've been super candid and really honest, which is incredibly valuable. So thank you. Obviously, I'm fortunate enough to be seeing you sort of in a month or so's time when you'll be doing a masterclass for our FMM Plus guys in London, which is going to be wicked, cool. Yeah, cool. Which I'm looking forward to tremendously. Yeah. But also, you know,
I've never done one of them before, so
it's going to be epic. I mean, exclusive, fantastic, can't wait. But also, I would love to cycle back around with you again in the future to talk more, because I know there's so many different bases we could have touched, and you're so prolific and so much music coming out that there'll be so much more for us. So I'd love to have you back on the show. It's been absolutely awesome. Thanks so much, John.
Cheers. Thanks a lot, mate.